Transmission begins.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
This is the Josh Tolley Show on the GCN Radio Network.
All right, we're talking to Chris Courtlander. We're gonna try this again because this issue is so vitally important. And Chris, you were talking about how 4 people have now committed suicide connected to an out-of-control Bureau of Land Management raid. You were raided yourself over a button and a belt buckle. Tell us your story, and then I want to get to Jason Chaffetz because that's interesting as well, and it ties into this. But was it really a belt buckle?
I mean, we didn't know really what the common denominator was, but at the time it was over a suspender buckle and a military button. Those were the only 2 items on the search warrant.
Why were they so important?
They weren't. They needed an excuse to expend their money that they had in their coffers before they got reappropriated before Congress the fiscal year ending in October 31st. They get $250 million every 12 months, and they were ordered by the chief law enforcement officer that oversees the federal government other than the FBI to go out and raid high-profile people so they could justify their expenditure and keep their salaries of $80,000 to $125,000 a year.
How do you think these suicides tie in? Well, first, do you think they were actually suicides? Because sometimes we hear suicide. Like I had a case where a teenager was handcuffed behind his back, searched twice by law enforcement for a weapon, put in the back of a squad car, and somehow shot his right temple with his left hand. So sometimes, suicides are kind of weird. Do you think these were really suicides? And if so, what prompted them?
Actually, I've been asked that question many times. I've actually had a retired FBI agent call me from Los Angeles who heard one of my other radio shows and mentioned that same thing. Personally, I think that these were really suicides. Okay. One of them was a Mormon doctor who was a month from retirement. His name Red in Blanding, Utah. He was raided by over 100 federal law enforcement agents that came through his home and raided him over an Indian artifact that was 1/1 inch long. All of this can be verified on my press release on custermuseum.org, and on the left-hand column there's a press release link. This is an amazing thing because when the Bureau of Land Management law enforcement comes in, they come in guns a-blazing. They point them at your head. I'm not exaggerating. When we were here at the Cuttlefield Museum, they took down one of our college interns on the floor, spread eagle, and one of the agents put an M16 to the back of his head and held him there for over 5 minutes. Over what? Over a button and a suspender buckle.
This is beyond ridiculous. It's almost hard to wrap your mind around. Let's say you're not supposed to have that suspender button. For some reason, it is of some national importance. What happened to the days where 2 officers just come in with like either a warrant or a seizure request and say, "Hey, you need to hand this over"? Like even though they shouldn't do that, what happened to those days?
Or what happened to days Bureau of Land Management can subpoena you to civil court in a federal courtroom and put you under oath and ask you questions? You're exactly right. What happened to those days? I'll tell you what happened. After 9/11, President Bush W. signed an order to militarize each one of the secretaries of the cabinet department and giving NOAA, Department of the Education, EPA, BLM, Department of the Interior, everybody their own SWAT team. Because we didn't know if we were going to be invaded by our enemies when all that was happening. He wanted more federal law enforcement inside of our boundaries in case something happened. And since then, since we appropriated all that money through Congress, it is still perpetuating itself in perpetuity every year, and they keep going back to get the money that was originally appropriated. So it's a monster that just creates feeding itself. But thank God we have Congressman Chaffetz, to bring a bill to demilitarize the BLM and give the power back to our local county sheriffs. Josh, keep in mind, these are the same guys that did Bundy. These are the same guys.
Yeah,
the same agents.
That's exactly true.
I mean,
I've had the Bundys on the show a number of times.
So they bring machine guns into Nevada because the cows are eating federal grass. I mean, think about that.
I know. It's way overkill. It's not proportional at all. Why, and I want to get to Jason Chaffetz in a minute, but why the suicides? I mean, let's say you're raided. Let's say they took your half-inch Indian artifact. Why kill yourself over that?
Right. Well, what happens, and I'm a victim of the deep state, I'm here to talk to you about it on the other end of automatic weapons here for 8 hours. They were in my vicinity. When I built the museum back in 93, we found some bone remnants when we were building, and we're inside of an Indian reservation on private property here at the town of Gary Owen, Montana. I'm speaking to you from the Custer battlefield this morning. And it was my duty to contact the Department of the Interior to make sure these bones were not human remains because of a law called NAGPRA, Native American Graves Repatriation Act. So I sent them to the archaeologist department of the Department of the Interior, and they came back as buffalo bones, not human remains. When I was raided, one of the Bureau of Land Management agents picked up the glass case with these bones in it in our collection, and they waved them 3 inches from my nose and said, "These are little girl bones. Where is she buried? You're going to prison for the rest of your life, and you were forfeiting your property." So when they do this to you for hours and hours on end, when they leave, you can imagine how people feel. In Dr. Red's case in Blanding, Utah, a Mormon doctor who delivered over 3,000 babies, was a community doctor. They told him, "You're going to lose your medical license. You're going to forfeit your property. You're never going to see your family again." He's in his late 60s, just about to retire. He took his life that night. 3 days later, a teacher who was raided committed suicide because they told him, "You're never going to teach again. You're going to forfeit your house. You're never going to see your family again." And what they do is they come in and treat you like terrorists, hoping you're going to plead guilty to a crime so they don't have to go to federal court. Thank God my attorney would not let me plead guilty to a crime. I asked her to plead me down on 2 or 3 times over a 5-year period because I couldn't take it anymore. But I'm the only person that was not indicted and did not pay a fine and did not commit suicide. So I'm trying to be very outspoken, get behind Chaffetz's bill. Robert Weaver committed suicide December 31st, 2016. That's number 4, subsequent to the Department of the Interior and Bureau of Land Management raids on innocent people that have no criminal background.
And they escalated so quickly. And you're right. You're absolutely right. I mean, they try to get you to plead to things. And there's an alarming stat that well over 95% of the time, when the feds bring a case against somebody, it results in jail time. And the ignorant will say, well, that's because the feds are really good at proving what... No, that's not it at all. They threaten you with 40 years in prison, so then you cop out for 5.
Exactly. I mean, you don't have a choice. They have an endless purse. What they did to me, they didn't prosecute me. They didn't charge me with their crime. So, Josh, my right to a speedy clock for a speedy trial never started. So they persecuted me for 5 years. I spent over $300,000 on attorney's fees, and I was never charged with the crime.
Wow. So are you afraid then that writing this book and speaking on shows like this is going to somehow get the anger of the BLM back on at you? And I want an answer to that right on the other side. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back right after this. 4 suicides and counting, billions of dollars in lost revenue, land deals that go to foreign agents, and that's just the tip of the iceberg when we see what happens with the Bureau of Land Management and their squads that shouldn't even own firearms. We're talking to Chris Courtlander. He is the founder of Museum as well as a victim of this sort of action. Now, I asked you the question before the break, Chris, coming out and talking about this, your experience writing the book, are you afraid that you're going to face retaliation from the BLM?
Possibly, but I am also taking the stances shedding more sunshine on this subject gives me more protection. And now that we have a congressman with 7 co-sponsors, I feel a little bit a little bit safer speaking out and telling the truth. Also giving out the press release, the CusterBattlefieldMuseum.org with the press release link on it, with all of the documented newspaper articles and YouTubes. Senator Hatch actually drilled Eric Holder in a senatorial hearing over Dr. Red's suicide, and I have that posted on the Custer Battlefield Museum page under press release. So it's nothing that hasn't been out there before, but this 4th suicide with Robert Weaver in Cody, Wyoming in December of 2016 really woke me up to come out and speak so vocal and let the public know really what is happening with their Department of the Interior police force. They're trying to justify their existence when our county sheriffs should be enforcing the laws, not federal police force that's trying to justify their existence.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. These sheriffs need to realize not only their responsibility, but their power as well. So what happened? What happened in your case? I mean, first they tell you it's buffalo bones, then they raid you, tell you it's little girl bones. Where'd you put the body? How did that all end?
Well, it ended with them wanting me to plead guilty to 9 felonies. I was never charged with the crime. So every month, my attorney would get a phone call and saying that the grand jury is going to convene the 3rd Thursday of every month in Billings, Montana, and if your client does not plead to a crime, we're going to stack more charges on them. And they did this for 4 years and 8 months. And then finally, I got a closure letter from the United States Attorney's Office saying the investigation is closed and there's no charges that are going to be filed. But for those 4 years and 8 months, I was out of my mind trying to deal with that and keep my businesses going. They kept threatening they were going to make me forfeit my town under a seizure law. But after I got that letter, I ended up suing 24 federal agents in the Court of Claims in Washington, D.C., knowing that I could not sue the sovereign, but I wanted to air their dirty laundry in a federal court case so it would be there in perpetuity, hoping that information would prevent further raids that were over the top and overzealous. But evidently my efforts were wrong because there has been a 4th suicide just a few months ago.
Now, you referenced that there's a friend in Congress, Congressman Jason Chaffetz from Utah. He's not staying, though. I mean, all of a sudden, here's this guy who's a rising star in Congress, in his party, in the eyes of Americans, and he says, yeah, I'm not even going to finish out my term. Matter of fact, I might leave, and there's speculation he might leave by the end of the week. So what do you think is causing this, especially if he's the one that's behind H.R. 622, which ends this sort of action?
I don't have a crystal ball, and I don't know the answer to that, but there's been recent reports that he has a medical problem. I just don't know why he's pulling out early, but hopefully that one of the other 7 congressmen that has signed on to his bill will carry the torch forward. Yeah, he has been a rising star, and actually Dr. Red was a Mormon doctor in his state who committed suicide. So that may have been a catalyst for him to propose this bill in front of Congress to demilitarize the Bureau of Land Management and give the power for enforcement back to our county sheriffs.
Yeah, and his medical issue is with an operation he had on his foot, and that's not a take you out of the game sort of issue, but they're using it as a reason why he's not in the office this week. But there's just a lot of people with the question saying, hey, wait a second, did somebody get to him? Because we're seeing this happen. I mean, look what the intelligence community is trying to do to Donald Trump, and there's obviously suspicion that if this guy, who is vocal in his taking down of inappropriate government actions, somehow just, oh, by the way, I'm not even going to finish my term, somebody's thinking, well, something's up. This is either blackmail or a threat, or there's a scandal that's not supposed to get out or something.
No, right. It's very odd. I was actually very shocked when I heard that. So only time's going to tell what's going to happen with Congressman Chaffetz. Some saying that he's doing it early to possibly pose himself for a run at governorship, or possibly Senator Hatch's seat once he retires.
Interesting. So what would you say to those people who are facing similar sort of situations that you were facing? Because it's not as if there was only 5 cases of these and you survived. This happens quite often, even to lesser extent of intimidation of ranchers and all that sort of stuff.
This is what my unprofessional advice would be, being a victim of the deep state and a former law enforcement officer, is when approached by any type of officer with arrest power, do not speak to them, do not cooperate, do not answer any of their questions, and tell them that you want an attorney present. That is my number one message to your listeners. Even on a traffic stop, if the police ever ask, can I search your car? The answer is absolutely not, because you have a constitutional right for them not to search that car without a warrant, even if you have nothing in that car and you're hiding nothing. Never give up your right, because if you give up your right, they're not giving you anything in exchange for you giving up that right. And I can guarantee you this, the children of those law enforcement officers that are asking you to give up your right to search without a warrant, they would never, ever tell their children to give up that right. So remember this, listeners, never give up your right to search without a warrant, because that's a right we have that's given to us from our founding fathers. So the bottom line is, the police are out there to do one thing. That's to enforce laws, arrest people, and put people in jail.
Yeah, and that's a very profitable business too. I mean, this idea that there's no profit in policing is ridiculous. The average officer generates over $250,000 in revenue through fines and tickets and citations and all that sort of stuff, seizures. So it is profitable. Why do you think we've taken this direction, though? I mean, we used to be the land of Andy Griffith, nice county sheriffs, and unless you actually did something wrong, I mean, there was even a lot of grace, a lot of, hey, you know what, Bob, don't let us catch you doing it again. This is your warning. Now, everybody is a terrorist if you're not wearing a badge.
That's absolutely correct. That's what it seems like. And especially with federal law enforcement, because a lot of these agencies that I mentioned before, they are trying to justify their existence and keep getting the appropriations from Congress every year to keep the money flowing to their agency. They have a cush job. They get paid in between $85,000 and $125,000 a year. And we're not talking about guys that work for LAPD in Los Angeles or high-risk departments that have felony calls every hour. We're talking about guys that sit behind desks with little gold badges and guns, and once or twice a year, they might go out to justify their existence. It's all about the money, Josh.
That is so sick. That is so sick to think that this country that was founded on so much freedom is going down this path. Give everybody your website again so they can get the book when it's out and follow what you're up to.
CusterMuseum.org. There's a link on the left, press release. Read the press release. And there's also a link on there for you to contact your federal delegation. We need your listeners to call their federal delegation and tell them to support Congressman Chaffetz's bill, H.R. 622.
Perfect. Chris Courtlander, thank you so much for joining us. I'm sure we'll do it again in the future. Folks, stay where you're at. Hour number 2 right after this. Hey, thanks for watching. If you loved what I had to say, then subscribe right here. If you hated what I had to say, subscribe right here. It's fun being mad on social media, isn't it? Either way, I'd love to hear from you. Send me an email right there.